Hey, happy new year. I hope 2022 is going really well for you so far. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking to you through my front room window. Well, that's because a few days ago I tested positive for COVID, so I'm in isolation. And it's just an example of the thing that we already know, that there's so many things that are beyond our control. And that's why I'm so excited to be going into this brand new series that we're starting this morning, focusing on better decisions and fewer regrets. We know there's so many things that are beyond our control, so let's focus on those things that we can control. And as we set off into this new year, I hope that it'll be one that when we look back at the end will be one that is full of joy and optimism, and not one that's full of regret. And there's something we can do about that by focusing on the decisions we make. So let's jump straight in to session 1 of Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. If we have one thing in common, it's that we want this year to be a good year. When we get to the end of 2022, we want to be able to look back on a year that was full of the things we want it to be full of, instead of a year that's full of regrets. None of us are setting off into this new year with a dream in our hearts that it'll be a year categorised by regret. Regrets are like Zoom calls. We want less of them, not more. So that's why we're kicking off this year with a new series that's all about helping us live with less regrets. We're drawing some material for this series from a book by Andy Stanley called Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Now, you can get a copy at Amazon, but Andy has kindly made this content available to us so that we can share it with you, so you don't have to get your own copy of the book. If we want to have less regrets, then perhaps we need to recognise what causes them in the first place. Just think about some of your regrets. What is the common theme that runs through all of them? Now, there's one thing that all of your regrets have in common. Now, just take a breath before I tell you what it is. You already know the answer, but you probably don't want to hear it. The thing that all of your regrets have in common is you. Before you have a go at me, just think about it for a moment. You were there for all of them. All of your regrets are a result of something that you did or didn't do. Now, I know that's simplistic thinking, but it doesn't mean it's not true. Sure, there are other factors. There were other things at play that caused you to do or not do whatever it was that you now regret. But for whatever reason, you said it, you did it, you bought it, you went there. Perhaps the thing you regret was caused by something that someone else did. That act was the catalyst behind you doing or saying whatever it was that you did or said. You reacted in a way that you later regret. Now, I know that if they didn't do it in the first place, you wouldn't have reacted in that way. But can we really lay it all on them? We still had a choice. We chose to react in that way rather than respond differently. But, we also regret things that we didn't do or the things we didn't say. We regret the missed opportunity or a choice we didn't make. You didn't say it and now you regret it. You wish you could go back and be able to say it. We tend to regret the things that we didn't do more than the ones we did. I remember when I received the call from my dad to tell me that my granddad had died. One of the overwhelming emotions I feel when I think about that time is regret. It's not a regret about something I did, it's something I didn't do. It's something I didn't say. I regret not telling my granddad how much I loved him and how thankful I was for him. I also regret not talking about my faith with him. I didn't tell him about the impact that God had made on my life. And I hope he saw it, but I never told him. I never overcame that awkwardness to talk about something that's really important to me with someone who was really important to me. I remember that feeling of regret at his funeral, something I hadn't done, and now I couldn't go back and try again. Regret is painful, but it can also be helpful. We make mistakes, we get it wrong. What we do next is the important part. Do we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves down, learn from the mistake and move forward? There's that old cliche, practice makes perfect. No, it's a load of rubbish. It doesn't. Practice just makes permanent. If you do the same thing over and over again, you just cement it in. Evaluated practice makes perfect. Learning from our mistakes and then adapting or adjusting is how we grow. My experience and my regret with my granddad is part of the reason behind why I'm so passionate about the church being a place that removes unnecessary obstacles from people finding faith. I could have and I should have invited my granddad to come to church with me, but the church I was part of didn't operate with guests in mind. It was a lovely church, the people were lovely, it did a lot of great stuff. It was a church like most churches. It was set up for people who were already part of it, for people who already had faith, not for people who were curious or skeptical about faith. Now, that's why I jumped at the chance of being part of the team here at FBC, because I could see that this is a church that's focused on being a church that people who don't normally go to church could feel at home in. Anyway, let's get back to what we're talking about. Every regret we have is a result of a decision we made. We are the common link in all of our regrets. And so too are the decisions we make. Now, if a regret is a result of a decision we made, then perhaps we need to find a way to make better decisions so we can have fewer regrets. And as you've already guessed, that's what we're going to explore here. The secret behind making better decisions lies with something that Jesus modeled for us: asking questions. Now, you probably don't think of Jesus as someone who asked a lot of questions. We tend to think of him as someone who was asked a lot of questions, and he was. If you take a close look at the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, the 4 accounts that tell us about who Jesus is and what he did, you will see that he was asked 187 questions. Many of these questions were from people looking for advice and guidance. Now, of the 187 questions, how many do you think Jesus answered directly? 3. Jesus only answered 3 of these 187 questions that he was asked, and that have been recorded for us. Just 3. Jesus' go-to response when he was asked a question was to ask another question. In fact, Jesus asked 307 questions. Asking questions is at the heart of his teaching and his wisdom. And I think that's because Jesus knew that telling people what they should do rarely results in them doing what they should do. But equipping people to ask the right questions is a far more effective way of helping them make good decisions. Now, people are still asking Jesus questions now, and he's still answering them with questions. How often have you asked God for advice, for wisdom to make a big decision? And how often has God given you a clear, simple answer? I'm guessing it's not that often. For me, when I've gone to God asking him to help me make a decision, I often sense that he's saying to me, what do you want to do? Now, that simple question helps me evaluate my options based on what's really important to me. It leads to a bunch of other questions that I can ask myself and God to help me arrive at the answer that I'm looking for. Now, sometimes I wish that God would just tell me what to do, that he would make every decision for me, or at least the big ones. Now, that might make life simpler, but it wouldn't make it better. Any parent knows that we can't make our kids' decisions for them. My daughter's got some big choices to make about where she goes to uni, and I can't make that choice for her, even if I wanted to. We know that asking good questions is a key part of making good decisions. We've all experienced it. When we realise that we've made a bad decision, we often say, I should have asked more questions. If I asked better questions, I'd have had more information from which to make a better decision. Asking better questions leads to making better decisions. So that's why we're going to explore 5 questions together that we can ask whenever we have a decision to make. My hope is that if you ask yourself these questions, you will make better decisions and have fewer regrets. We don't just want to make better decisions so we can have fewer regrets. That's probably not the motivation for most of us. But it is worth recognising that the regrets we have are often, if not always, a result of a poor decision we made somewhere along the line. A key reason why you are where you are today, why you are who you are today, is because of the decisions you made yesterday. Now, of course, there are other limiting factors at work. There's no decision I could have made that would have made me the king of Denmark. But in large, I am where I am, and I am who I am because of how I have reacted or responded to my circumstances. Now, don't forget, a reaction or a response is still a decision. So whatever decision you have to make, these 5 questions can serve as a filter or a framework to help you ensure you make good decisions. It's important we get this right because we know that our decisions lead to an outcome that impacts not only our lives, but also the lives of the people around us. You're impacted by the bad decisions you make, but so too are the people around you, so too are the people you love. That's why this is a big deal, and it's why we're talking about it here. Now, this series will be practical and hopefully helpful. Faith is practical and helpful. So much of what Jesus has to say to us is both practical and helpful, but it's also mystical. You can ask yourself these 5 practical and helpful questions, and they will help you make better decisions. But there's a mystical side to this too, an aspect that makes this more than just some good advice. If we lean into God as we ask ourselves these questions, I fully believe that He will help us make better decisions. Now, this is more than just a framework or a filter we ask ourselves. It's an opportunity to bring God into the equation. As we ask these questions with Him in the picture, I'm sure He will ask us some more questions to help us make better decisions and have fewer regrets. That's the mystical side. We do the things we can do. We ask ourselves the questions we need to ask, and we seek God to guide us in the process, and somehow He does. As we intentionally put God at the center of our decision-making framework, He responds. He prompts and He prods. He guides and directs. It's helpful, it's practical, and it's mystical. Now, just asking questions doesn't do anything. It's what we do with them that counts. For them to make a difference, we have to ask the question, then we need to answer it honestly. There's no point asking the question if you're not going to be honest with yourself. And the third thing we need to do is act. We have to act on what we've asked. Do you know that you do this already? You've already got a bunch of questions that you ask yourself when you're faced with a decision. We ask ourselves things like, will I like it? Can I afford it? Will it hurt me? Will anyone find out? What will I do if someone finds out? Now, some of these questions are helpful, others not so. We already have a decision-making framework, but perhaps these questions need changing if we want to make better decisions. After all, they were the questions we asked before we did or said or bought that thing that we now regret. They are the questions we asked before we decided not to speak up or not to take that opportunity that we now regret. So in the next message, I will share with you the first of these 5 questions that we think will help you make better decisions. These 5 questions help us pause. They help us take the long view. They help us look for the wise option and focus on the relational impact of our decisions. I'm sure you will find them helpful just as I have. But for now, I want to leave you with 2 values that I hope you will use to underpin and override any decision you make. They're actually taken from something that Jesus said when He answered a question directly. Now remember, He only answered 3 of the 187 questions He was asked. This is one of them. Matthew records this for us. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now that's one of these 3 questions that Jesus answered. There's 613 commandments in the Jewish law, and this guy wanted to know which is the most important, which is the top command. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Now it seems a simple enough answer, but Jesus hadn't finished. He goes on to say, and the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. Now Jesus has just told them that loving God with everything we have is the greatest commandment. Now there's not going to be much disagreement to that, but what He says next is amazing. He says the second commandment is like the first, meaning it's of similar importance. Jesus is saying loving others is as important as loving God. And when you look at the things that Jesus said and the things that Jesus did, you can see that He's actually showing us how we love God. A love for God that doesn't result in a love for others isn't a love for God. A crucial way in which we love God is through loving others. Now, Jesus hasn't finished. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Now He's referring to what we now call the Old Testament. At another point, Jesus said that He hasn't come to abolish the law, but fulfill it. I think it's fair to say that Jesus is saying that loving God and loving others is the basis of Scripture, of the Bible. If you want to sum up the entirety of what the Bible asks us to do in 4 simple words, it will be love God, love others. Just remember that and you're good to go. So when it comes to our decisions, we can use this as a basis for our framework. Before you ask yourself one of the 5 questions we're going to explore in this series, or before you ask yourself the usual questions you ask when you make a decision, ask yourself, does it love God and love others? Or is it honouring to God and does it bless others? If the answer is no to either of them, then we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't think it. We shouldn't say it. We shouldn't buy it. That's the baseline of our morality, and it's the baseline for any decisions we make. If you think back to some of those regrets that you carry with you, would you have made the decision that resulted in the action that caused the regret if you asked the question, does it honour God and bless others? If you asked that and answered honestly and then acted on it, how different would things have been? Now, we can't change the past, but we can change our future. We can make a decision to work on our future decisions so we don't repeat our past regrets. My challenge to you this week is to take these words of Jesus with you wherever you go. Memorize those 4 words. Love God, love others. Use them as a filter for the decisions you make this week. You know, when you're faced with a decision, ask it, answer it honestly, and then act. Now, there's so many things that are beyond our control, but our decisions are not one of them. Instead of worrying about what we can't control, let's focus on the things we can. Let's focus on making better decisions so we can have fewer regrets.